throughout the centuries have based their works on many inspiration. Human emotions have been used by many as a medium of drama that keeps the audience entertained and interested. Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman is still considered one of the best-loved plays of our time. In Death of a Salesman, Miller tells the tale of a man battling one element that threatens his very existence: failure. Death of a Salesman is a tale of a salesman, Willie Loman, who has reached the end of his usefulness on the road. Willie has always had some inadequacy about his job, but they never really bothered him before. Now as he begins to see the toll that old age is taking on him, this inadequacy is overwhelming him completely. In other words, the phantom of his life has caught up with him. Not only is his job falling apart, but in a way, his life is falling apart. He cannot communicate with his son, he loses his job, and he basically starts realizing that he is becoming useless. The play consists of events that illustrate his mental anguish. This mental anguish is causing him to literally lose his mind. The play culminates when, after a succession of further humiliations, frustrated hopes, and demeaning memories, Willie climbs back into his faithful car that led him through his life of false truths and bad decision, and attempts one last ride to glory. The original Broadway production opened on February 11, 1949 at the Morosco Theater in New York City. It was directed by the famous Broadway and Hollywood director Elia Kazan. It starred L.J. Cobb as Willie Loman, Mildred Dunnock as his faithful wife Linda, and the two sons were played by Arthur Kennedy and Cameron Mitchell. It received rave reviews from prominent newspapers of the time, including the New York Times. Arthur Miller has written a superb drama, raved Brooke Atkinson of New York Times. He has looked with compassion into the hearts of some ordinary Americans and quietly transferred their hope and anguish to the theater. The monologue you are about to hear, performed by Charles Morgan, is taken from the original Broadway production. It was taken from the production as a dialogue between Willie Loman and Howard.
Yeah, business is definitely business. But just wait a minute. You don't understand this. When I was a boy, 18, 19, I was already on the road. Well, you see, there was already a question in my mind as to whether selling held a future for me. Because in those days, I had a yearning to go to Alaska. Well, because they just had those, 3 gold strikes in 1 month, and I just wanted to go to find out. Well, just for the ride, you might say. Oh yeah, my father lived many years in Alaska. He was quite an adventurous man. You might say we had quite a streak of self-reliance in our family. Well, anyway, I thought I'd go out with my brother and try to locate him and maybe settle up in the north with the old man. And I was almost decided to go, until I met the salesman in the Parker house. His name was David Singleman, and he was 84 years old, but he had drum merchandise in 31 states. And old Dave, he'd go up to his room, you understand. He put on his green velvet slippers. I'll never forget it. He'd pick up the phone, call the buyers, and without ever leaving the room, at the age of 84, he would make a living. And that's when I realized that selling was the best career that a man could ever want. I mean, because what could be more satisfying than being able to go at the age of 84 in 20 or 30 different cities, and being remembered and helped and loved by so many different people. I mean, do you know when he died? And by the way, he died the death of a salesman in his green velvet slippers on the smoker of New York, New Haven, and Hartford going into Boston. Well, when he died, hundreds of salesmen and buyers were at the funeral. Things were sad at a lot of the train stations months after that. In those days, there was personality in it, Howard. There was respect. There was comradeship. There was gratitude in it. Today, it's all cut and dried. There's no room for friendship or personality to bear. And you know what I mean? They don't know anymore.
When Arthur Miller wrote about Willy Loman, he was writing about what he believed the common man was. I believe that the common man is apt to a subject for tragedy in its highest sense, as kings were. This statement sums up Mr. Miller's great interest in human emotion and how it affects normal, everyday Joes like most of us. Death of a Salesman is a literary monument to this, the common man, and his struggle with his own inner self. It's time, I think, that we who are without kings took up this bright thread of our history and followed it to the only place it can possibly lead in our time, the heart and spirit of the average man.